The 1967 film, Bonnie and Clyde, directed by Arthur Penn and starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, is considered a masterpiece of American cinema. It is also, from a historical point of view, one of the most elaborate pieces of fiction ever presented to the public as being based on true events. Now, you're going to discover the complete list of lies and the reason why each one was chosen. Number 1. Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway look nothing like the real ones. Think of America's most famous outlaw couple. Now forget what you saw on the screen. Clyde Barrow was 5'7", had big ears, bad teeth, and a regular 1930s haircut. Bonnie Parker was even smaller, around 4'11", with short curly hair. And here's one detail. After a car accident in 1933, her leg was so badly burned that she limped for the rest of her life. Now compare that with the 1967 movie. Warren Beatty was over 6'1", and was considered the most handsome man in Hollywood. Faye Dunaway had been a model before she became an actress. Casting beautiful people to play ordinary people has always been normal in movies. But with Bonnie and Clyde, the actor's star power stuck to the story. From then on, everyone started seeing two poor Depression-era robbers as if they were movie stars. Number 2. The movie shows Clyde as impotent, and that never happened. In the 1967 classic, directed by Arthur Penn, Clyde Barrow is shown as a man who can't be with Bonnie in bed. It seemed like an intimate, true detail, but it was pure invention. The original script, written by David Newman and Robert Benton, went even further. It showed Clyde torn between Bonnie and the gang's driver. Warner Brothers would never have accepted that in 1967, so the team replaced it all with impotence. The one who made the final call was Warren Beatty himself, who produced and starred in the film. He thought it would be more interesting on screen. There is no letter, testimony, or record proving any of this about the real Clyde. On the contrary, everything points the other way. In the end, the trick took a violent criminal and turned him into a fragile, broken guy. The kind of person you feel sorry for. Number 3. In the movie, the gang has charm. In real life, it was just fear. The 1967 movie paints Clyde's gang as a kind of messed up but close-knit family, the kind that fights in the morning and hugs it out at night. Real life had none of that. What it had was constant distrust, everyone watching each other, afraid someone would spill to the cops just to save their own skin. No one knew that fear better than Blanche Barrow, who was married to Buck, Clyde's brother. She did not even want to be there. She got dragged into the mess only because her husband did. She survived, got 6 years in prison, and even helped the movie people tell the story. Then she saw the result and was furious. On screen, they turned her into a hysterical woman who only screams and gets in the way. Estelle Parsons won the Oscar for the role. But Blanche said the movie made her look like an idiot who only knew how to scream, and that woman had nothing to do with who she really was. If you love the real stories Hollywood gets wrong, hit subscribe. There's a lot more history they never told you. Number 4. The movie's C.W. Moss is a distorted version of W.D. Jones. That awkward, loyal young guy in the 1967 movie, played by Michael J. Pollard, came from a real man, W.D. Jones. But the real story does not match what's on screen. Jones joined the gang while he was still a teenager, around 16 years old. In the movie, C.W. is the simple guy, loyal until the last shot. Jones was something else. Arrested in 1933, he told the police everything, gave up what he knew, and spent years behind bars. In 1968, shortly after the movie came out, he gave an interview to Playboy that contradicted scene after scene. And he did not like how he was shown at all. On the big screen, a goofy kid. In real life, a man who made decisions and paid for them. Stop and think about that. The legend on screen and the person who lived through it barely recognize each other. So far, the lies about the characters, starting with Fact 5, the lies about the events. Number 5. The final scene is beautiful to watch, but that's not really how it happened. The 1967 movie ends with Bonnie and Clyde's death in slow motion, blood spreading slowly. That became a landmark in American cinema. Some people have never watched the whole movie, but they already know that scene by heart. The problem is that it lies in ways that matter. On screen, the two share a long look before the shooting starts, a pause, as if they knew their time had come. It looks great, but that's not how it really happened. The people who were there told a different story. The men who set up the ambush and the investigation done afterward show that everything happened way too fast. Bonnie and Clyde did not even have time to lift their heads or understand what was happening. No exchanged look, no goodbye, none of that dramatic pause. The real death happened in the blink of an eye, dry, with no soundtrack, with no poetry at all. Number 6. In the movie, Frank Hamer is the villain. In real life, the story is a lot more complicated. In 1967's Bonnie and Clyde, the ranger who set up the ambush is shown as a ridiculous guy who gets kidnapped and humiliated by the gang, and then only thinks about revenge. Here's the thing. None of that happened. Homer never crossed paths with the pair before the 1934 shootout. He was brought out of retirement specifically to hunt them down. Homer had already died in 1955, years before the premiere, and could not defend himself. But his widow and son did not let it slide. They sued Warner for defamation and settled out of court. The real man was the kind of person people are split on. He built his career in an organization with a heavy history of violence against Mexicans on the border. But he also faced down crowds to stop lynchings. The movies took this deeply contradictory man and turned him into a convenient villain. Number 7. The Great Depression shows up in glimpses, but nobody there really explains what it was. In 1967's Bonnie and Clyde, you can see families being thrown out of their homes and broke farmers passing across the screen. But those scenes work as background, not as explanation. Arthur Penn chose to keep the camera locked on the couple and leave the misery as part of the mood, in the background. And here's the detail not many people know. The original script had a lot more about the crisis of the 1930s, with banks closing and people losing their farms. But those parts were cut during revisions to speed up the pacing. In the end, the movie suggests that the two were products of their time, without saying what that time really was, or why so many people in the countryside saw them as people who stood up to the banks. The viewer leaves knowing what happened to Bonnie and Clyde, but not why an entire country had reached that point. Number 8. Why 1967 needed this movie. Look, the 1967 movie was not talking about 1934. It was talking about 1967 itself. At that moment, the United States was in the middle of the Vietnam War, civil rights marches, and the counterculture. It was in that climate that director Arthur Penn and actor Warren Beatty took the story of Bonnie and Clyde and turned it into something else. They said it loud and clear. They wanted to show two young people going up against a system that was already rotten on the inside. Clyde Barrow's gang became a symbol for a generation that distrusted the government, that had seen President Kennedy assassinated in 1963, and that no longer swallowed the old rules handed down from above. They took a real case from 1934 and used it to talk about the present they themselves were living through. And here's the twist. It was never a movie about the 1930s. It was a mirror pointed straight at the 1960s. Number 9. What stuck in the public's memory was not the true story, it was the movie. The 1967 film, starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, reached so many people that it ended up taking the place of the facts. Decades later, surveys of American adults revealed something interesting. Most of them formed their idea of Bonnie and Clyde from that movie, not from the records of the time. And it did not stop there. History professors at universities started noticing the same pattern. Students came into class repeating the big screen version as if it were proven truth. That is how Hollywood played a trick on history. Instead of showing what actually happened, the movie planted a new memory, neater and prettier, that took the place of the truth in the minds of millions of people. To this day, separating the real couple from the movie couple is still a difficult task. Number 10. What the movie got right after all. It would not be fair to say the 1967 feature got everything wrong. It got some things right. The gang's poverty was there, even if the camera softened it. Clyde's fascination with cars was real too. He preferred Ford V8s and stole those models whenever he could. The betrayal at the end really did happen, and it came from the Methvin family, who handed the couple over in a road ambush in Louisiana in exchange for a deal with the police. And there's more. The movie captured a real feeling. To many Americans during the Great Depression, Bonnie and Clyde were not just criminals. They were ordinary people taking on a system that seemed stacked against the poor. Their methods were crime, but people saw rebellion. The portrait was not completely wrong, but the gap between the screen and reality was big enough to change what people believed for decades. Number 11. The other versions tried to fix it, and the 1960s lie still won anyway. After the 1967 movie, Hollywood did not let go of this story. In 1992, Fox made Bonnie and Clyde, the true story, with Tracy Needham and Dana Ashbrook, filmed in the actual places where it all happened, trying to stay closer to the facts. In 2013 came a miniseries with Emile Hirsch and Holliday Granger, along the same lines, showing the two as the criminals they were, not as heroes. And in 2019, Netflix released The Highwayman, with Kevin Costner as Texas Ranger Frank Hamer. That one turned the camera the other way. It told the hunt from the side of the law and put the victims back on screen, but none of it stuck. The beautiful, romantic image that stayed in people's minds was still the one from 1967. And that is the lesson. A well-told lie is stubborn. Even when honest people come along trying to set the story straight, the first version is the one that stays. Number 12. The movie's final paradox. There is an uncomfortable truth here. That 1967 movie, with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, taught more people about the Barrow Gang than any history book ever will. Hollywood took two bank robbers and turned them into tragic, beautiful, almost romantic heroes. The problem is that a lot of it never happened that way. The documented facts tell a very different story, and that leaves the question nobody likes to answer. Can a movie be too important to culture and at the same time too irresponsible with the truth? Yeah, the answer is yes. And there is no better example in cinema than Bonnie and Clyde to prove it. Now pay attention to what comes next. Facts 1 through 12 are everything the movie made up. Facts 13 through 19 are the consequences that lie left behind. If you love the real stories Hollywood gets wrong, hit subscribe. There's a lot more history they never told you. Number 13, the fashion the movie created, and that never went away. When Bonnie and Clyde hit theaters in August 1967, nobody imagined what would come next. It was not just the shootout scenes that stuck with people, it was the way they dressed. Costume designer Theodora Van Runkle put Faye Dunaway in a beret, a long below-the-knee skirt, and a tight sweater. Within weeks, women across the country wanted that look, and berets disappeared from store shelves. The 1930s style came roaring back, decades after it had gone out of fashion, and designers spent years copying those costumes. But here's a detail few people stop to think about. The real Bonnie and Clyde were road robbers with no money at all, who bought used clothes from cheap, low-end stores. Hollywood took two poor outlaws and turned them into symbols of elegance that the fashion world never forgot. Number 14. What the movie did to New Hollywood. In 1967, Hollywood was still playing by the old rules. The bad guy always lost in the end. Violence stayed off screen, and the ending came with a built-in moral lesson. Then Bonnie and Clyde came along. The movie showed two robbers as flesh and blood people, filled the screen with gunfire, and ended with no forgiveness and no redemption. And audiences packed theaters week after week. That was when the studios realized something that would change everything. They could make serious money telling adult, raw stories with no good guy. Directors like Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, and Steven Spielberg point to this movie as the moment the floodgates opened for good. Without it, The Godfather, 1972, Chinatown, 1974, or Taxi Driver, 1986, probably would not exist. That criminal duo did not just rob banks on the road. They tore down the old way Hollywood made movies. Number 15. The soundtrack. Here's a detail almost nobody notices. In 1967, when Bonnie and Clyde hit theaters, director Arthur Penn made a choice that changed everything. He put bluegrass banjo over the shootout scenes. The song was Foggy Mountain Breakdown by Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. Think about that for a second. There is a bank robbery, people running, a car flying down the road, and what is playing in the background is that upbeat, cheerful banjo, almost like a party. The result? The audience felt nostalgia instead of horror. Crime turned into adventure, and the robber couple seemed like good people just having fun. Critics caught the trick. If Penn had used a heavy, dramatic orchestra, the same scenes would have felt scary and uncomfortable. The music did the dirty work without anyone noticing. It taught the audience to root for the criminals, and it pulled that off with 6 strings and a rhythm that sticks in your head. Number 16. The Oscars, the controversy, and the year Hollywood changed. Think of a movie about 2 bank robbers that almost took over the 1968 Oscars. It got 10 nominations. In the end, it only won 2. Best Cinematography and Best Supporting Actress for Estelle Parsons. But what happened outside the ceremony mattered more than any award. Months earlier, a public fight had started. Bosley Crowther, the most respected critic at the New York Times, attacked the movie non-stop. He said it glorified crime. Other critics jumped on the same bandwagon, but audiences packed the theaters, and the attack ended up turning against Crowther himself. The argument did not stop there. It forced a question nobody had answered. How far could movies go? In 1968, the American movie rating system was rewritten from scratch, largely because of this film. In one shot, it changed fashion, cinema, and the country's laws. Number 17. What Blanche Barrow really said about the movie. When Bonnie and Clyde premiered in 1967, there was someone in the audience who knew the story better than any screenwriter. Blanche Barrow was married to Buck, Clyde's brother, and she was the only one from the gang who survived to see Hollywood tell the whole thing. The most ironic part is that the producers consulted her during filming, and even so, she left the screening furious. Estelle Parsons won the Oscar for playing Blanche as a hysterical woman out of her mind, and that haunted her for the rest of her life. "That movie made me look like a screaming idiot," she vented years later. "I was too busy carrying bodies." Free after 6 years in prison, she spent decades trying to put her own version on paper. She died in 1988 without seeing the work published. Her memoirs only became public in 2004. In them, the Clyde she describes was nothing like a romantic hero. He was cold, calculating, and violent, with nothing pretty behind it. Number 18, the Bonnie and Clyde tourism industry. Think about it. A pair of robbers killed in 1934 still brings in money today. And almost all of it started with a movie. When Bonnie and Clyde hit theaters in 1977, two criminals became legends, and a door opened that never closed. Every year, the small town of Gibbsland, Louisiana, remembers the ambush that ended the two of them. The festival draws curious people from all over the country. The bullet-riddled Ford, the so-called death car, was on display for years in Primm, Nevada. There was a time when people paid just to sit in it and count the bullet holes. And in Dallas, museums still sell items tied to the gang. It is estimated that all of this brings in millions of dollars a year for those communities. And the detail that stands out the most is this: none of it would have happened without the movie. The facts alone never would have created that kind of demand. Number 19. The final test. What if the movie had told the truth? Think about it for a second. What if the 1967 movie had shown Bonnie and Clyde as they really were? Clyde would be a short guy with rotten teeth, broken by what he went through in prison and incapable of truly loving anyone. Bonnie, a young woman trapped in a life she had never planned. The gang, a scared bunch, fighting all the time, with nothing beautiful or romantic about them, and the 13 victims, including cops who barely made enough to live on, would appear with names and faces. Would that movie have been made? Almost certainly not. And no one would remember it today. That is what is uncomfortable. Sometimes the lie becomes bigger than the truth. Hollywood invented a couple more famous than the flesh and blood people. Blanche Barrow died at 77. Watching that version take the place of the real story, the 13 victims never got a movie. And that was no accident. That is how entertainment has always worked.